Welcome to the fourth episode in a Legendarium series about the life and reign of King Richard III of England. In Part 4, A King Does Not Sleep Easily, we will talk about how King Richard's attempts to reform English law ended in failure, in no small part because of how he took power. Upon taking the crown, Richard III presented himself as a reformer committed to justice and morality, who would correct the misrule and loose morals of Edward IV's last years. His signet registers include plans to better the management of royal estates, something he championed even before he took power. As King Richard set up the Court of Requests in December of 1484. This court allowed the poor to make appeals for justice which they normally couldn't afford to make. The Court of Requests would outlive Richard III and survive until the English Civil War 160 years later. Richard III also cracked down on fraudsters, imposing severe punishments for those who sold wine and oil while lying about the actual percentages of wine and oil in their containers. One can only imagine that the drunkards of England raised a glass to King Richard III. In the realm of legal reform, he insisted that trials be carried out in English rather than Latin, as few people in England actually understood the latter. To further the cause of legal fairness, King Richard III also took steps to make sure that local toughs couldn't intimidate juries and loosened censorship laws so books on any topic could be published. Indeed, the tragedy of Richard's reign is that these early promises of real reform faltered because of the means by which he took the throne. And he did that when his two nephews, King Edward and Duke Richard, vanished in the Tower of London while in his custody. The Lancastrian opposition took full advantage of the highly suspicious disappearance of Richard's nephews. They compared him to King Herod, the murderer of innocent babes, a betrayer like Judas Iscariot, and a tyrant. That opposition would be led in part by the queen of his late brother, Elizabeth Woodville. Unsurprisingly, Elizabeth became furious when she learned of her son's disappearance. She immediately entered into an alliance with Margaret Beaufort, the mother to the new leader of the Lancastrian faction, Henry Tudor. They agreed that Elizabeth would help get Henry on the throne if Henry would marry Elizabeth's eldest daughter, Elizabeth of York. Other allies included the Duke of Buckingham, who felt King Richard III hadn't been generous enough to him, and even King Charles VIII of France. Henry Tudor even planned to use France as a base for invading Richard's England. However, the rebels' first move proved premature and poorly planned. Bad weather kept Henry Tudor's fleet in port, and when the Duke of Buckingham rose up without help, King Richard's levies easily crushed him. Buckingham went to the chopping block on November 2nd, 1483. Meanwhile, his men spirited away his 5-year-old son Edward to France for safekeeping. There, young Edward joined the other rebel leaders who had escaped to Brittany. On Christmas Day 1483, they acclaimed the exiled Henry Tudor as king. Denounced by Richard III as illegitimate, Tudor's personal claim to the throne through the Beaufort line was extremely weak. If he could not marry Elizabeth of York, he could never present himself as a credible king. Although Richard sought Tudor's extradition back to England, King Charles VIII simply moved him deeper into France, where Tudor recruited highly trained professional French and Scottish mercenaries. Though a capable commander and an earnest reformer, King Richard III simply could not overcome the fact that he had seized the crown by force, and few forgot it. His political and personal woes grew far worse when his 10-year-old son, Edward of Middleham, died suddenly in April 1484. He was buried at the church at Hutton in North Yorkshire. Anne Neville died only 5 months later, in March 1485, at the age of 28. Most likely, she died from tuberculosis. By all accounts, Richard III remained faithful to Anne Neville all his life, a rarity among English royalty. When Richard III seized the throne, he believed that he had a healthy son, which would ensure his Yorkist dynasty. Now he had no son and heir, and the rebels were working very hard to make sure that Richard III had no future. And unfortunately for Richard, rumors soon gave the House of Lancaster a new weapon to use against him. After the death of his wife Anne, rumors spread that Richard had not only poisoned her, but that he planned to take his niece Elizabeth of York as his new wife. If he did so, he would have denied her as a potential bride to Henry Tudor and made his ascension to the throne almost impossible. Yet such a marriage would never be accepted by the lords and church of late medieval England. These rumors became so prevalent that Richard III summoned the lords of England and publicly denied them in March 1485. He even threatened anyone caught spreading these rumors with imprisonment. As Richard III worried about the prospect of a second invasion from France led by Henry Tudor, he had to backpedal on his own program of legal reform. He restored the policy of forcing nobles to make gifts of money to the monarchy so he could raise enough money to muster an army. As Richard's reign neared the end of its second year, Richard III must have known grief, fear, and perhaps guilt. How much longer could he hold out? We'll find out in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed this installment of the Legendarium. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.